There is this incredibly powerful, um, almost intimidating moment right before your brush actually touches a pristine white
Oh,
canvas.
absolutely. The pressure is real.
Right. You're sitting there. Maybe your easel is bathed in this beautiful natural light pouring from a window. And the mission for today seems, well, straightforward enough. You just want to paint a vibrant violet flower.
Just a flower, right. Resting against some deep, dark green leaves.
Exactly. But anyone who has actually tried to do this, to really capture that flower, knows you are suddenly standing on this razor's edge. You're balancing raw human intuition, profound chemistry, and like strict physical laws.
Yeah, it's monumental.
Yeah.
Painting a flower is essentially this massive task of decoding light itself.
It really is, because the basic rules of color mixing, the ones we were all taught in kindergarten, they're actually betraying us. So today on our deep dive, we are decoding why capturing the vitality of nature on canvas is basically a high-stakes game. We're looking at how the human brain interprets light, and then how we recreate that optical magic using, crushed minerals and oils.
And we are drawing on some truly masterful guidance for this exploration. We'll be looking closely at the teachings of GRUPO RAIIM, Lord Palacios, and Rodolfo M.
Right, because they treat the canvas not just as a surface, but almost like a laboratory for light.
Exactly. To understand the real struggle of painting that violet flower, we have to first look at the literal chemistry happening on the palette.
Well, let's start with the heartbreak every painter knows, the muddy violet.
Oh yeah, the dreaded mud.
You take your classic heavy ultramarine blue and your bright fire engine red, and the formula we all learned says red plus blue equals purple, right?
That's the golden rule we all grew up with.
But when you actually mix them on the palette instead of a fresh electric violet, you get this dirty, opaque, sort of grayish-brown puddle.
It's visual mud. The energy is just completely extinguished.
It really is. And reading through Laura Palacios' analysis, it becomes so clear that this isn't a failure of the artist's eye or talent. It's an actual physical collision of light spectrums.
Yes. Palacios points out something fascinating. The traditional color wheel, the red, yellow, and blue one, it hides a very deceptive chemical secret.
Okay, what kind of secret?
Well, classic pigments are rarely isolated wavelengths of light. Like a classic ultramarine blue, it actually has a red bias. It naturally leans slightly toward purple.
Oh, interesting. And what about the red?
Meanwhile, that classic bright red inherently carries a yellow bias, so it's leaning toward orange.
Wait, which means when a painter mixes classic red and blue, they aren't just mixing two colors.
Nope.
They are secretly bringing yellow into the equation without even knowing it.
Exactly. You are mixing all three primary colors simultaneously. And in the physics of subtractive color, when red, blue, and yellow interact, they effectively neutralize one another.
Oh, wow. So they just cancel each other out?
Pretty much. The chemical compounds bind together and absorb the entire spectrum of light. They trap all that luminous energy and drag the mixture straight down into a flat gray or brown.
You're just suffocating the light reflection. It really reminds me of the dynamics in a high-end, Michelin-starred kitchen.
Oh, I like that comparison. How so?
Well, you can have the most spectacular fresh ingredients, like a beautifully marbled cut of meat or...
Because cyan and magenta operate on a completely different visual frequency. Their interaction entirely bypasses that neutralizing trap we talked about. A high-quality cyan and magenta contain zero yellow bias in their molecular makeup.
Oh, so there's no hidden third color crashing the party.
Exactly. When combined, they synthesize a flawless crystalline violet. The specific chemical structure of those pigments allows the blue and red wavelengths to reflect back to you with zero interference.
I mean, that makes total sense chemically. But if the modern CMY wheel is mathematically and scientifically superior for vibrant mixes, it kind of raises a historical dilemma, right?
How do you mean?
Well, do we just throw our traditional, very expensive cadmium reds and cobalt blues in the trash? It seems highly unlikely that centuries of masterful art history relied on defective tools.
Oh, it is a very seductive trap to assume a new system just invalidates the old one. But GRUPO RAIIM emphasizes that true mastery lies in synthesizing the strengths of both palettes.
Okay, so there's room for both?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because painting is about managing physical weight just as much as managing light. Cyan and magenta synthesize these dreamy, high-vibration, pure violets. They have this very airy quality to them.
But if you are painting the dense central stamen of that flower, or say a ladybug resting on a leaf, a modern magenta and yellow mix might look pretty, but it lacks physical gravity, right? It feels visually flimsy.
Exactly. That is when the traditional palette reclaims its purpose. A classic cadmium red is a chemically dense heavy metal pigment. It provides an undeniable opaque mass on the canvas.
It's pure concentrated fire.
It really is. Modern transparent mixes simply do not have the microscopic density to replicate that kind of visual weight. So you use the modern palette for the air and the vibration, and the traditional palette for undeniable mass and gravity.
Which brings us to a really fascinating trap involving the materials themselves. Let's say a painter adopts the modern palette. They buy tubes explicitly labeled cyan and magenta.
Okay, they're ready to go.
They mix them, anticipating that flawless, crystalline violet, but the resulting paint is still dull, still looks flat and lifeless.
Ah, yes. This is where Laura Palacios' concept of the nobility of pigments becomes so crucial.
The nobility of pigments, I love that phrasing.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It treats the material with necessary respect, acknowledging what paint actually is microscopically. Colored powders suspended in a medium, usually refined linseed oil or an acrylic polymer.
Right.
True, pure magenta pigment, which is chemically known as quinacridone, is incredibly complex and expensive to synthesize.
It's a premium ingredient, so to circumvent that cost, manufacturers producing commercial or student-grade paints create what they call magenta hues.
Right, the key word is hue. They are not using pure quinacridone.
So what are they using?
They are mimicking the color by mixing cheaper, lower-quality reds with hidden white pigments to lighten the value. Visually, when it's in the tube, it passes for magenta.
But chemically, it is totally compromised.
The physics of that compromise are catastrophic for the painter. When that cheap magenta hue, which is just loaded with microscopic white fillers and low-quality red particles, interacts with cyan, the structural integrity of the paint film basically collapses.
Because of the white fillers.
Yes. Those cheap white particles are essentially opaque microboulders.
Oh, wow. Opaque microboulders. So when the light hits those, instead of traveling cleanly through the paint layer and bouncing back to the viewer's eye, the light waves scatter in just chaotic, random directions.
Exactly. The luminous energy is absorbed and dispersed. The mixture becomes cloudy, chalky, and just dead.
It completely disrupts the transmission of light. Laura Palacios makes it so clear that investing in high-quality, noble pigments is not some act of artistic snobbery.
No, not at all. It is a literal physical requirement.
You are paying for the crystalline structure of the powder. You need a molecular structure that actually permits light waves to pass through the oil, hit the canvas, and return intact. You aren't buying prestige, you're buying the physics of light transmission.
Which is absolutely paramount when your goal is to make the subject feel alive.
Okay, so if compromised white fillers destroy the transmission of light in our midtones, that raises a pretty serious physical problem for how we handle shadows.
It's a huge problem, yes.
To make the vibrant violet flower pop, we need deep, contrasting darkness in the surrounding green leaves. And the immediate beginner's instinct is to just reach for a tube of black paint to darken the green. Less light means more black, right?
That's the instinct. But Rodolfo M. is uncompromising in his critique of commercial black paint. He explains that applying too black to a vibrant canvas acts like an anvil dropping onto a delicate mechanism.
An anvil. That's a strong visual.
It really is. It completely flattens the volume, severs the vibrational harmony of the surrounding colors, and it literally steals the optical oxygen from the painting.
I mean, the logic there can feel a bit counterintuitive to a beginner. Because in the natural world, shadows under a dense tree canopy or beneath a car genuinely look black to the human eye. Mimicking that reality seems like the logical step.
It seems logical, but the contradiction is resolved by understanding Isaac Newton's observations and the fundamental difference between light and pigment.
Right, because Newton demonstrated additive synthesis.
Exactly. In the natural world of light, mixing all wavelengths together produces pure white light. In that paradigm, a shadow is simply the absence of light photons. Less light equals darkness.
But a canvas does not emit photons.
No, it doesn't. Paint operates strictly on subtracted synthesis. Pigments act as microscopic light sponges.
So a green leaf on a canvas only appears green because the pigment is subtracting the red and blue wavelengths, absorbing them, and reflecting only the green back to us.
Precisely. And pure black, pigment like carbon black or ivory black, is the ultimate subtractive sponge. Is an absolute optical void.
Wow, an optical void!
It absorbs every single light wave across the entire visible spectrum and reflects absolutely nothing back.
The analogy from the sources that perfectly captures the physics of this is the idea of blackout blinds.
Yes, that's a great way to visualize it.
Imagine standing in a dimly lit room. The light is incredibly low, but your eyes adjust, right? You can still perceive the subtle variations in the wood grain of the furniture, the soft edges of the architecture, the depth of the space. There is very little light, but there is still visual information.
You can still see the volume of the room.
Exactly. Mixing black paint into a shadow is the equivalent of violently slamming down heavy blackout blinds. You haven't just darkened the room, you have completely annihilated the form. You create a flat, dead hole in the three-dimensional illusion.
And the human eye registers that void as a heavy, unnatural dead weight on the canvas. So, GRUPO RAIIM details the masterful alternative. You generate profound darkness using only vibrant colors.
No black at all.
None. You construct shadows out of complexity, utilizing rich tertiary colors and earth tones.
So you're mixing dense, blood-like reds, abyssal, oceanic blues, and rich, burnt siennas.
Exactly. The French Impressionist painters like Monet and Renoir famously banished too black from their palettes for this exact reason. If you analyze the darkest shadows in their works, you don't find black.
What do you find?
You find deep, ultramarine blue interacting with dense violet and dark brown.
Because those deep colors are still actual hues, they possess specific chemical structures that reflect specific, albeit very dark, light waves back to the viewer. They create a shadow that registers as profound darkness, but it still vibrates with luminous energy.
The shadow breathes. It replaces an empty void with colorful, vibrating depth.
Okay, so if black pigment acts as a cosmic void absorbing every photon, creating a highlight presents the exact inverse physics problem, right?
Yes, it's the complete opposite challenge.
How do you maximize light return to the viewer without making the paint completely opaque? If I want the sun to catch the very tips of those violet petals, my instinct is to grab titanium white and just mix it directly into the violet.
And that is exactly what you want to avoid. Titanium white is chemically designed for opacity. Its molecular job is to cover and conceal everything underneath it.
So mixing that dense, chalky pigment into a pure, crystalline violet instantly transforms it into a heavy pastel deadweight.
It turns into a milky, flat lavender. It completely loses that gemstone resonance we just worked so hard to achieve with the pure cyan and magenta.
The transparency is just destroyed. So how do professionals handle highlights?
Rodolfo Im reveals that the professional mechanism for brilliant, luminous highlights is a technique called glazing, or veladuras.
Oh, the mechanics of a veladura are so fascinating. Instead of adding opaque white pigment to lighten the value of the violet, the painter uses a transparent medium, right?
Exactly, like a highly refined clear linseed oil or a specialized acrylic glazing liquid.
And you mix that clear medium into the pure violet pigment, essentially physically spreading the microscopic color particles further apart in the suspension.
You construct a translucent veil of color. The painter then applies that thin, transparent violet glaze over a section of the canvas that has been pre-painted white, or even just over the bare, bright white gesso of the canvas itself.
The physics of the refraction here are simply beautiful. It is exactly like building a Gothic stained glass window.
It really is.
The ambient light from the room travels completely through that transparent violet veil. And because the medium has a specific refractive index, the light passes undisturbed until it hits the pure white canvas underneath.
Which then acts as a mirror.
Right. It reflects the light back through the violet pigment and straight into the viewer's eye.
You are utilizing the brilliant white of the canvas as your primary light source, literally illuminating the pigment from behind.
You're painting with liquid crystal. By completely avoiding the opaque, chalky interference of white paint, the original quinacridone and cyan pigments maintain 100% of their vibrational purity. They appear infinitely brighter and more luminous because the light is actively transmitting through them.
This management of light at a microscopic level requires immense discipline. And GRUPO RAIIM offers a really profound reflection on this entire journey.
What do they say?
They argue that painting is not merely a pleasant hobby of filling in silhouettes. It is a rigorous, demanding training ground that forces the human brain to completely reconstruct its relationship with reality.
Oh, because the human brain operates as an efficiency machine, right?
Yeah.
To navigate the world without being paralyzed by sensory overload, our brains rely on these rapid, evolutionary visual shortcuts.
Exactly. The brain categorizes information instantly. It tells us the sky is blue, leaves are green, shadows are black. It slaps a label on the visual data and moves on so we can survive our day.
But the act of painting demands the complete unlearning of those evolutionary shortcuts. It requires a nearly meditative level of attention to the physical world.
Yes. It forces the artist to recognize that a highlight is never just a patch of white paint, and a shadow is never an empty black void. Everything observed is a complex, vibrating interaction of light waves refracting off matter.
It transitions the brain from merely looking at the world to truly seeing the mechanics of it.
It is a total optical rewiring.
Which perfectly leads us to a final thought we want to leave you with today, building on this whole idea of how you interact with color. We've spent this time dissecting the physical struggle of subtractive color, using dense pigments to absorb and reflect light on a canvas.
Right, the struggle of the painter.
But consider how radically different your daily interaction with color often is now. When you look at a photograph on your smartphone screen, you are experiencing pure additive synthesis.
Because the screen is physically emitting beams of red, green, and blue light directly into your retinas to create that image.
Exactly. But if you take that exact same photograph, print it out, and paste it on a massive billboard down the street, the physics completely invert. That billboard emits zero light.
It relies entirely on the subtractive CMY inks we discussed today.
Yep. Cyan, magenta, and yellow acting as microscopic sponges, selectively absorbing the sun's rays and bouncing the remaining colors back to you. So here's a specific observational challenge directly inspired by the sources we explored today.
Something to test your newly rewired optical attention.
Exactly. The next time you walk down a sunny street and you see the shadow of a tree projected onto a white wall, stop for a second. Your quick evolutionary instinct will instantly tell you that the shadow is gray or black.
But look closer.
Yes, look at it with the newly trained, attentive eye of a painter. You will discover it isn't gray at all. It is actually teeming with deep violets, intense ultramarines, and warm earth tones. It is an incredible symphony of colors that was always there, just waiting patiently for you to finally see it.